Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. With me today is Minal Mehta. And Minal is a leadership coach who partners with ambitious leaders to design and build careers that are in alignment with their true selves. She helps leaders create massive impact while approaching life with joy and ease. And if you are one of those really ambitious leaders listening, I'm going to venture to say that it is at least possible that joy and ease are maybe lower on the list than they should be. So I'm really happy to have you, Minal. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here, John.
So you spent time working at places like Google and YouTube and LinkedIn and Amazon, and you are on what is now like a 10 plus year-long journey of also delving into meditation, psychology, Zen, and other modalities like that. So I find that to be a pretty interesting combination. I think that it's something that happily is becoming at least a little bit more common, but still I would say it's uncommon, this hard charging career person at these companies like that, plus meditation, psychology, and Zen. Tell me, what has that been like for you? Like what is that even like?
That's such a great question, John. And I do think more and more people are getting open to this, but just going back to my own psychology, right? Like I have all these brands on my resume. I went to like the best schools and worked at the best companies, and it was all coming from a place of scarcity. Right.
Yeah.
It's like I was afraid if I didn't go to Harvard Business School or if I didn't go work at Google, that, it meant that I was lesser. So I was looking externally to feel better internally. And,
wow.
Yeah. And so like many folks, at some point, you get a wake up call, and mine was in the form of just having my son while trying to ship a massive project at LinkedIn and realizing I did something really stupid. I only went on a 7-week maternity leave. I do not recommend that. I was working through that entire time. And then I came back and I was just overwhelmed. And there was this moment of like, okay, this can't be it. This is not right. And so that started this whole exploration into what I call like just understanding the mind. Understanding my mind is how I started with this journey, right? Because all of us start with our problem first. Yeah. And then realize that actually, in order to be a better executive, a better leader, I actually need to understand myself better. And so marrying those two things has become a journey in and of itself. And here I am helping others sort of marry those two things and then live a life with joy and ease, while also not sacrificing, that ambition, that drive, and getting things done and having that impact that they want to have in the world.
I love that. I think that's just fabulous. And I think that, you found out for yourself something that we all read in some of the great philosophers, right? And all that ancient wisdom, and yet still have to kind of learn for ourselves to really get it, which is that, making yourself better is, I think, the first and most important place to start if you want to make the world better, right?
Absolutely. Plus 100 to that, John. Like basically, I tell people when you have a problem, the only place to go is go inwards, right? And most of the leaders I work with, and this is true of many people in the world, there's always an external blame. I can't get a job because the market is really difficult. I'm not getting promoted because I have a terrible manager. I'm not, getting this project shipped because my engineering team isn't working very well. Like come up with like all of the reasoning, right? It's always external because we're afraid to look inside. But the only way we can start solving this, what is going on, is by first going inside and then bringing that externally. I'm not saying external is not important, but the internal is the place to start.
That's perfect. So now, just to go there before we go too much further that way, you must have worked around some really great leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And in this show, I try to at least start with some recognition of the importance of communication to
Mm-hmm.
leadership. And
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if there are any leaders that you worked with who really impacted you. And if there's a story or two that you could tell us about a great leader who was a great communicator, that kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with Jeff Bezos. And very early
Okay.
on in my career, I worked at Amazon, and I was shipping something pretty important to the company. And so I had reviews with him probably every 6 weeks, and I got to see how he operated, and then have continued to watch how he operates out in the world, right? Even since I've left Amazon. And
Yeah.
he's one of the leaders I admire greatly. And one of the things that I've realized about communication is that communication starts with clarity. A lot of people come to me and they're like, oh, like I want to own the room. I want to be a better communicator. I want to have executive presence. How do you do it? Right? This is like, even now as I get clients, this is one of
Yeah.
the questions I get very, very often. And I say the place that it starts is with clarity. If you're not clear on what you need to say, then it doesn't matter how you say it, it's just not going to land. And Jeff Bezos was a great example of that. He knew very clearly who he was, right? He knew very
Yep.
clearly where he wanted to take the company. And then he could express this in a way that made sense. And one of the things that people talk about now about Amazon is the culture of the written document versus the PowerPoint presentation or the slide
Yeah.
deck.
Right.
And yeah, it's incredible because you write a 6-page document, you have to really think deeply, get clear about what you want to do, be able to communicate that clearly with all of the data and the details, and go into this room and defend your plan with, you know, a group of 20 or 30 very senior leaders at the company. And so both that combination of having clarity of self, clarity of thought, and then being able to clearly articulate that, I believe, is one of the magical things about somebody like Bezos. And that's why the company is on the path that it is today, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And another, let me think about other leaders, right? But Reid Hoffman is another one, founder of LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I got to work with him while I was at LinkedIn on a couple of projects. He was not the CEO of the company anymore, but he came in and spoke to specific product leaders from time to time to help them with specific projects. And I was lucky enough to be working with him on one of those projects. And again, the clarity with which he thought was impressive. The clarity with which he prioritized his time and energy and effort was amazing, right? And also the clarity of knowing his strengths and knowing where he could play and where he needed to have others take over was also incredible. So I would say, and I can go on, but I think one of the hallmarks of great communicators, especially in this leadership realm, is people who are extremely clear on the inside, and then that clarity can be expressed beautifully on the outside.
Boy, I would just plus 1,000 to that myself. And that's absolutely where I start with people when they want to give a TED-worthy talk or when they want to really do something great at the global customer summit or whatever. It really comes down fundamentally first to being clear with yourself, because how could you ever be clear with anyone else if you're not clear with yourself?
Mm-hmm.
So I love hearing that. That's fabulous. You know, and the other thing that I hear in that's still an issue for me, and I realized several years ago. So I heard that prioritization is one of the hardest things that the human brain does. Like it consumes the same amount of oxygen and glucose at a very high rate as anything else difficult that we do. So prioritization is one of the hardest things. And I think that for a lot of my life, prioritization was so hard that I just blew it off and tried to do everything instead. Right. Instead of prioritizing stuff, I just tried to do everything. And like, that is not a winning strategy, by the way, you know? So what what did you see maybe with Reid or maybe with others that you've worked with or yourself, you know, any insights on that
Mm-hmm.
prioritization? And just did like, I think it's good to start by acknowledging that it is hard.
Yeah. I think anything done with willpower is extremely hard.
Yeah.
There's like they talk about willpower and decision making coming from sort of the same internal source, which is why
Yeah.
like it's easy to not eat that chocolate cake at 8 a.m., but very difficult to not eat that chocolate cake at 8 p.m., right? Because that
Yeah.
store has been depleted. And one of
Yeah.
the things I work with my clients on is to not work from willpower, but work from flow. And when you're working from flow, prioritization actually gets pretty easy. And so when we have willpower, right, we're like, we've got to sit down and write down our
Yeah.
priorities. And then like anything that's outside of our priorities, we've got to say no. Everyone says, say no. You hear
Yeah.
all of this leadership advice on LinkedIn. And that's really difficult because it's not always easy to prioritize. It's not always easy to know what you need to say yes to and what you need to say
Yeah.
no to. And so
Yeah.
I think about this a little bit more cyclically. There's times where you actually need to say yes to a lot of things so that you can figure out what you need to do. And then it gets clearer on what those things are. And then it becomes easy to say no to the things that don't matter, right? But people miss that first cycle of collecting. I call it collecting the dots and then connecting the dots, right? And then once dots are connected and you know, okay, I need to do A, B, or C because the dots have been collected and connected and it's just happening that way, then prioritization actually becomes really easy, right?
That's
So
really
this
good.
is,
I like that.
So that's my tip is don't do it with willpower, do it with flow. Easier said than done, but that's the work I do with the leaders I work with.
Yeah, well, and I do think that there's a paradigm shift in first saying yes to a lot of things with the intention of getting clearer. And then once you start to get that clarity, saying no gets easier. You know, I guess you're saying is collect and connect.
Collect and connect. Yeah.
I like that.
And it's really, cyclical. Really it's not like I've collected dots in the first 25 years of my life and now I'm going to connect the dots and be super focused. And then if I can't do that, I'm like, I hear this, like I fear I'm going to be obsolete if I can't like keep getting narrower and narrower. And I think it's just cyclical and seasonal.
Yeah.
Like even in the businesses that we build, John, like there's, we're collecting dots on some things, we're connecting dots on some things. And to understand what is going on within us is really important.
You know, I hear that very directly in my life right now. I feel like I'm just starting to be at the point where I've collected enough dots that it's starting to get clear for me. So that thing that's maybe really wide just a little bit ago is starting to narrow. And I can see that pretty soon it's going to be more important for me to start saying no again versus saying yes to everything, even though I'm kind of on the tail end of that yes to everything mode. So that hits very close to home for me in this very moment that we're talking.
Incredible.
So how does somebody who is really, really focused and driven and a go-getter and, you know, maybe a little bit of a type A personality, how do they bring joy and ease into that whole world?
Yeah. So most of these folks are going to get a wake up call of some sort. And I've heard everything from, very common, of course, I feel very, very burnt out, right? To whatever I do, I can't get promoted. I just want to quit my job, but I don't know what to do beyond it. So I'm just going to stay and do this. My family doesn't see me at all. And that doesn't seem like it's okay anymore. I'm not getting promoted. Things aren't moving, all the way to infertility amongst the women. And probably amongst the men, of course, it's not quite as obvious, right? But infertility is super common, and like bigger and big migraines, super common.
I mean, I think it goes right to health, massive health problems if you don't listen earlier, right? Like, I definitely see that a lot for myself and for my clients. They've often been getting wake-up calls. I know I was getting wake-up calls and I was just ignoring them till finally it was like, whap.
Exactly.
And I just couldn't ignore it anymore.
you can't ignore it anymore, right? So most people are getting wake up calls.
Yeah.
Right. And the sooner you listen to it, the better. I was just speaking to a very
Yeah.
senior leader from Google right before this, and they were saying, oh, like I had all these wake up calls and I just kept taking it in my body. And now there's migraines, headaches, knee hurts, can't move, stress, burnout, you name it. And it's going to take them like 3 to 5 years to recover from that. We don't want to get to that place, right?
Yeah.
But if you do, then please take the 3 to 5 years to recover, because that's really important. Yeah. But so the way you introduce joy and ease, like it's going to sound simple, but it's not easy, is actually alignment, right?
Okay.
Aligning what's going on in our conscious mind with what's going on within us, aligning what's going on in our external world with what's going on in our internal world. And so for most of my clients, the place to start is really going inwards, almost for the very first time, because they've been so focused, like I was, on the external rewards, the external brands, the external validation, the external everything, that it's very foreign to first just start going inwards and understanding, like as simple as like, who am I? What do I want? What does success look like for me? And you talk about communication. I think most people don't know how to communicate with themselves. And that's the first muscle that we work on building, right? Because you've got to, like, just like a child, you don't listen to the child's going to keep getting angrier and angrier and throw tantrums. And, at some point it's going to get worse, and, they won't talk to you as they grow up. It's the same thing. If you don't listen to yourself, the same thing is going to happen. So the first thing we start with is like that connection with self, understanding what's going on, right? And getting that clarity within us. The next step is to start building some conviction to take the actions that we need to take. Right. Yeah. And this conviction has to come from this listening in the inner world that we have, but also because you start taking some actions, right? If this inner voice is like, you know what, you just need to go for a walk every day, simplistic, but you need to be out in nature. And our inner voice does tell us things like that. Then listen to it and see what happens. Suddenly you're out in nature, dots are connecting, and you're like, wow, that project that I was stuck on, like, it's so clear what I need to do. Come back, work on it, right? So that's an example of the joy and ease, because that now you're doing that project because of flow, instead of doing it because you're like, I need to sit in front of my computer and write that project proposal and it's not coming and I'm so frustrated and I'm so angry. Right? Yeah. Just by taking a moment to communicate with yourself, you're able to get unblocked. Right. And that gets bigger and bigger, because what happens with the leaders I work with is they're so used to having a blueprint that is given to them, right? Do this, go to these schools, execute the project in these ways, please these stakeholders, and you'll get to the next level. But once you get to a certain point, that paradigm completely breaks, because what you're looking for at that director level at companies such as Google and YouTube and so on, and the VP level at, smaller companies, is somebody who's actually able to swing for the fences in a way that only they can. But you can't figure out how to swing for the fences in only the way you can if you don't listen to yourself. So they're not looking for, can you do the same strategy as 50 other leaders? You're going to be unemployed very, very quickly. They're looking for, what is it that you can uniquely bring to the table that's going to shift the trajectory of this company, right? And the only way you can do that is by listening to yourself and having that emerge with joy and ease, versus like forcing it, reading, like all this time we spend on LinkedIn or reading books or trying to emulate other people. At a certain stage, that just stops working. It has to come from within.
Yeah. Yeah. You remind me of my training, which comes at it from a neurobiological standpoint. And I think they overlap quite a bit, because we've got, in a very simplistic way, we've got an ancient brain called the paleo-mammalian brain, and all mammals have it. That's why it's mammalian, and paleo, it's old. And then wrapped around the outside of that, we have our neocortex, which is where all the logic and the language and the reasoning and everything lives. That is not in the ancient brain. And the ancient brain, though, has access to reality on a much deeper level than we will ever have access consciously. We're not going to logically smell pheromones, but we do smell pheromones, right? But the logical brain isn't aware of it. It's the ancient brain, and it's seeing facial microexpressions, and it notices patterns in things, and it's super ultra smart and fast and pays attention to all kinds of stuff that we are not tracking and can't get in touch with consciously. but it can't communicate with us by just talking to us because it doesn't have language. So the way that our ancient, super smart, dialed in brain talks to us or communicates with us is through gut feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's, I just have this feeling I need to get outside. Right. I just got a gut feeling I need to go for a walk. Okay, do it. Right. That is very likely your ancient, very smart, very dialed in brain giving you that gut feeling because something is up, and it's going to really help you to listen to that. But I think a lot of times, because we're so used to being logical and, we do the logical brain override on that stuff. Yep. And it doesn't help us.
Actually, I don't even think it's the override. The logical brain can't even hear it.
Yeah.
Like we're like walking around like minds right now, not listening to what's true for us. As you said, it's gut feelings, it's sensations in our body, right? I read somewhere the truth is sensational, and that's true in the newspapers, really, but also the truth in our body has sensation. And so we are not trained in this day and age to listen to that sensation. And so by slowing down, by starting to actually create that dialogue, right, between these two brains, between our conscious and our subconscious, however you want to frame it, is the very first step to not only having that joy and ease and flow, but also it is the only way you're going to succeed. Because nobody cares about if your form of success is the same as like everybody else's. You need to be an N of one to succeed in this marketplace, in this world today.
Yeah. I think that's a really, really good point. I think that is, and it's only getting more and more and more true, as we get AI to do all the kind of peripheral stuff and all of that. Your uniqueness and your unique approach is what's going to land you the position and get you that next level.
Exactly.
So that's awesome. Well, so, I don't know if you feel like it, you could say no, but I just had a masterclass that I taught like an hour or two ago about your origin story. And it sounds like we heard a little bit of your origin story, but I would love to play with you on your origin story if you want to. Sure. Do you want to just kind of do that?
Let's do it.
Well, so it sounds to me like you were a high roller at companies like YouTube, right? And at LinkedIn and all that. And then you had your first child.
No, second.
Second. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Second child. And go ahead.
No. So, the truth also like goes way further back, right?
Of course.
This, like,
that's what
Yeah.
So let's hear a little bit of that.
Let's hear. Like, I do think children did play a part in it, but okay. So the true origin story, and it might sound weird, was way, way earlier. Like even when I was 5, I had this like felt sense of I am the world and the world is me, the sense of interconnectedness that Buddhism talks about, right? Which obviously I ignored because I was 5 and, expected to get like, great grades in math. That was one of my family's requirements, right, to do well in school. And then kept going, right? Kept getting the best scholarships, getting the best brands, kept going. But the one thing that I think I always did was there was always a connection between mind and body in some way. And I'll give you an example, right? Like I came to Stanford for my undergrad. I thought I was going to major in biology and go on and become a doctor. And then a year in, I was like, no, I discovered computer science and this is really fun. And maybe I should do this. And like, I was one of those people that hadn't declared their major junior year in college, which is unheard of in my family, right? Like this like complete person who doesn't know what they're doing with their life by the time they're a junior in college.
Right. How could you do that?
How could you do that? Right. But then I declared computer science. And then a year later, same thing happened. It's like, do I want to be an engineer? And realized I didn't want to be an engineer. I actually really liked thinking big picture and helping people solve problems. And so I ended up becoming a product manager. Before product management was this coveted field that everybody wanted to get into, right? So I got into it because I just listened to what was true within me, right? But then somewhere along the way, as I got into these companies and started performing and getting promoted very quickly, getting the choice projects, I stopped being able to listen to this intuitive voice that was within me, right? And then, as you said, like the wake up calls happened. Like I had my first child, and this might sound strange, but I was in labor and realized what a beautiful meditative state that was. And actually, that's when I started meditating.
Yeah.
Before just dabbling, like I was like, I want that state without having to be in labor.
Yeah, right.
And so that's how I started meditating. But then, yeah, like having, then I was at LinkedIn and I was striving and trying to make some pretty massive changes within the company. Like I was leading a transformation for a product that was dying and I needed to revive it. And everybody was involved in this while I was pregnant with my second child, and then went ahead and had my child while I was still super focused on work. And like that, I couldn't figure out how to make this work in any way, shape, or form. And it broke me, right? I literally was like, how do I handle this? And then the beauty of my second child, as he grows older, is he's not the type of child that is convinced by a carrot or stick. You actually have to parent him. You actually have to go deep into his psychology and be with him to parent him. And so all of that, like that was true even when he was a little tiny baby. So people are people and they don't change. And then I just didn't know what to do. And then they gave me more work. I got like a bigger team while I was on maternity leave, while I was barely taking any maternity leave. And I just did not know how to deal with it. And to go back to that idea of collecting dots before we connect the dots, at that point, Shonda Rhimes, the person who does Grey's Anatomy and all of that, she'd written a book called The Year of Yes or something like that. I didn't have time to read the book, but I liked that idea of the Year of Yes. I was like, I'm stuck. The only way I can get unstuck is by saying yes to everything that comes my way. And seeing where that takes me instead of like hiding and becoming smaller and smaller. And that was my intuition. It said, instead of becoming smaller, become expansive and see what happens. Right. So that was my first experiment. I did that. I said yes to a coffee invitation with somebody who then became my coach. And, I'm being super vulnerable here, but like, she pointed out to me in our first coffee chat, she's like, your need to be seen is heartbreaking.
Oh.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh.
Right. And then that was the beginning. And and obviously the truth is sensational. So there was sensation in my body as she said this. And I was like, wow, that is true. And what am I going to do about it? And that then started this journey, and I continued, getting bigger projects. I got then, I was hired by Google, which is an even harder company to get into than LinkedIn, worked on some really cool products with amazing people, and found, again, like this disconnection. And every time the disconnection between intuition and reality happened, bad things happened until in 2020. It was 2020. I found myself before COVID walking into the office and I just couldn't walk up the stairs. Like my body just physically at YouTube, beautiful building, not just a tech company, it's a media company. So you can imagine like colorful paintings, like the vibe of the office is amazing. People are smart and creative, like literally everything my brain could want. I would get into the office and I just couldn't walk up those stairs. And I realized something needed to change. And this is where that alignment between, mind and intuition is really strong, because then the mind is like, well, you still need to have an income. You have 2 children. You have to pay for preschool. Like what's going on? And so what I ended up doing was actually negotiating a 3-month sabbatical instead of just up and quitting. And during that 3-month sabbatical, COVID hit. So of course the world was also showing me that it was time to slow down. My first 5 weeks of my sabbatical, I did something that all of my clients do, which is I needed to be productive. I'm going to take meetings with other companies. I'm going to look externally to solve my very internal problem that was happening. Right. And 5 weeks in of my 12 weeks, like I was like, I've wasted 5 weeks of my 12 weeks of time off, like trying to feel better by going external. And then suddenly I was like, this is not working. And I changed my priorities. I'd collected enough dots and it connected within my system. I changed my priorities and I had only one goal every day. I was meditating every day because that started like a while ago, but then I had only one goal, which is to do yoga at some point during the day. It didn't matter whether it was like 10 a.m. or 10 p.m. I just needed to do yoga at some point during the day. And that was the only goal I had for myself. And that shifted everything. And I met somebody, I remember like 10 weeks into my leave, and they're like, oh, tell me about yourself. And I told them about myself. And they're like, well, what do you do for work? And it was the very first time I hadn't led with, this is what I do for work. I'd actually managed to connect with who I was at a deep level. And since then, it's not a connection that I'm willing to give up. So anytime there's a small sensation on this connection is off, like I know how to course correct. And that's what I work with my clients on, right? Not only developing that intuitive connection, but then, and that's the first part of the program I work with my clients on, but then for the clients who are excited about that, are hitting it out of the park, I then work with them on how do you build this so that you never lose that connection and you can build yourself as an engine of growth and really, really just deliver massive things in this world. And yeah, so that's, I guess, the origin.
Okay,
and it keeps going.
That's awesome. And that's, I had a feeling there was a lot more than what we heard. And so thank you for sharing that, because that is vulnerable and that is real. And, I love that you had to do this for yourself. And then you got pushed into, it seems to me, like supporting others in doing this, the I invented it because I needed it story,
yes.
right?
Yes. And you're right in terms of it's pushed me into it, right? Like going back to this idea of flow that you and I have been talking about. I was running a venture-backed startups. When I left YouTube, I was running a venture-backed startup. And during the course of that, due to a series of things that happened, I created a coaching cohort. And then one of the people in that coaching cohort asked me to be their coach. And then I really enjoyed working with that person. And then the next thing you know, like I've literally been pulled into doing this work, right? And so when people say, what is your calling? There's a lot of pressure to that word. And what I say is, your calling is nothing more than what you're being pulled into doing for this season. And for me, I've been pulled into doing this work for this season, and it's gratifying work, it's challenging work, it's human work, it's deep, it's messy, sometimes like really hard, and yet there's a feeling of flow because I've been pulled into it. I didn't sit down and write, I need to become a leadership coach, and then go make it happen. It happened because of the inner work that I did to get here.
Yeah, I love things like that where you create something and it becomes such a thing that it pulls you in, and you have to go do it because it's just there calling you. That's really, really cool. So what is, gosh, I notice like time flies when I'm talking to you. What is one big thing that someone who's a super go-getter, who's maybe got joy and ease way down on the list right now, what's one big thing that they could do to start to like listen for this and get in touch with this and make a difference for themselves?
That's a great question. I would say the biggest lever that people have, honestly, is meditation. If you can give yourself 5 minutes of meditation every day, it doesn't have to be big. And John, I can share with you a link, a YouTube link after this as well, like of a meditation I share with my clients. It's the single biggest gift you can give yourself to start understanding what is going on within you. Right? So that's number one. I would say I have two other things. As you start meditating and you're out in the world, you start asking yourself when things are happening, am I playing my game, my own game, or am I playing the game I think others want me to play? Just start noticing.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, and not just the game others want me to play, but the game I think others want me to play, right?
Yeah.
Because
yep.
Right? So that's a question you can ask yourself through the day, and the answer will become really clear. what's going on
Yep.
with you, right? And then the third thing I find is people, when they get to this point, are unable to take decisive action. They get stuck in analysis paralysis. And so going back to being a decisive action taker, if something's intuitive, if something's telling you you need to go for a walk, well, go for that walk. If something's telling you you need to work with somebody on this transition phase that you find yourself in, or you need some support on this growth, well, go find that person. Don't suppress it. Don't overanalyze it. Do I really need it? So and so says I don't. This manager says this, that. So those are the three things. Meditate, right? Ask
Yep.
yourself, am I playing my game or the game I think someone else wants me to play? And then
Right.
third, be a decisive action taker towards the things that are coming up for you from within.
Yeah. I think that's fabulous, fabulous, fabulous advice. And the thing that I would jump in and just say is, I like it when you say it this way. You said, give yourself 5 minutes a day. I mean, you're worth it, right? And if you can't give yourself 5 minutes a day, not to make you wrong or anything, but something's up, right? Something's worth looking at there. Not bad or wrong, just what's going on that you couldn't give yourself 5 minutes a day? Because it really is giving yourself something. I've got a meditation practice that has waxed and waned, but I know that when I'm meditating, it is a good thing. And I've done some of the hardest, most incredible things that I've ever done. And meditating was a part of that. I think meditating was a huge contributor to me being able to do those things. So I will back you up. And then I love the question. Can you go into a little more depth about it? Like, am I playing the game? Am I playing my game, or am I playing the game I think others want me to play? Like, say a little bit more for someone who's intrigued by that.
Yeah. Okay. So I created this little model because I'm, at the end of the day, an engineer and an MBA.
Yeah.
And a product manager, where I created models, right? So you think about yourself and you're in the center, right? And then there's other people. And you have this idea that if I please somebody else and they think highly of me, then I think highly of me, if that makes sense. So you're outsourcing, right? You're like, oh, if John thinks highly of me, if John thinks I'm a good communicator, then I'm a good communicator, right? If John thinks I'm a good person, then I'm a good person, right? Yeah. And we're doing this all the time in our worlds. Like, especially my client, I used to do that. If my boss thinks I'm worthy of promotion, then I'm worthy of promotion. Yeah. And then, so that's what's going on. Like, if you want to draw out this model for yourself, like draw out, like, how much are you outsourcing? If that person thinks I'm good at this, then I'm good at this. If this person thinks I'm worthy, then I'm worthy. If this person, and it might go back all the way back to your parents, but take a piece of paper and draw this like little map for yourself. And that's how you know. And then one day through meditation, I decided I'm done. I'm just going to say, I like myself. I respect myself. I'm worthy. And my opinion of myself is the only one that matters. So this outsourcing stopped. Right. So that's the answer. But like this intrigue is like, you can just draw out this mind map because you're playing the game other people want you to play. Because if I want you to think I'm a good communicator, then I'm going to think, okay, what does John want me to say? Yeah. How do I prepare for this? But you haven't said any of this. I'm just in my mind making up all of these things to be seen by you, not for any other reason than that helps me see myself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, really good. And I love the term like outsourcing your self-worth. Like you're outsourcing something that probably shouldn't be outsourced, right? Nope. When we really examine it. So I think that's awesome. And then take action when you have those intuitions. And I would say start to notice how that works out, right? Because you'll notice, oh, okay, I did something because I had that intuition and it worked out. And then another time, maybe it doesn't work out, but maybe that wasn't an intuition. Maybe you somehow interfered with that or whatever. Start to notice those things. I think that is just an unbelievably powerful tool that I'd say most people are not even aware of. But when you get in touch with that. It's just wildly powerful.
Yep. It's your superpower.
Yeah.
Noticing is the superpower.
Noticing
people
is a
ask me,
superpower.
how do I change? And I'm like, you just notice.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. Noticing is a superpower. Well, I'm noticing that we're just about out of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if there's anything I didn't ask you or anything that you wanted to say before we wrap up.
Well, that's a great question, John. I feel like this was an incredible conversation and we've hit on all the key points. Get in touch with yourself, communicate with yourself first, get clear. Yeah. It'll help you be a better leader, not just because you're clear about what you want and you can make decisions, but then you can communicate clearly with other people. And at the end of the day, I'll just reiterate, like the only game that you can actually play successfully is your own game. So the sooner you can start doing that, the more time you have on this planet to actually make it all work.
Yeah. I love that, right? Because it is a finite game ultimately. Mm-hmm. So that's really important. And, I zoned sharing your LinkedIn address. I will put that in the show notes, but it's linkedin.com/in/ and is it MINALMEHTA?
Yes, that is correct.
Boom. So you can find Minal on LinkedIn. She puts out lots of great content there. I know she works very hard to make that worthwhile. And I want to thank you for joining Minal and me today. And Minal, thank you for joining us here on livelikealeader.show. It was a real pleasure to get to know you a little better, to hear all this stuff. I think it's super duper useful. And thank you for what you're out there doing.
Thank you, John, for having me and for a fabulous conversation.
All right. Well, we will see you next time on livelikealeader.show. And by the way, if you like the show, please give us a 5-star rating. Please tell your friends about it. Get it out there. I think that these conversations with fabulous leaders like Minal are super duper helpful. And it's nice to know that there are wonderful people out there who are dedicating their lives to making the world a better place. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being one of those people. And we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.